Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the first episode of Real Talk with Shan and Bilal. Now, obviously, this is going to be a political podcast, and since we are starting off in the middle of a rather interesting period in United States history, we are going to be having 4 episodes to start us off. They're going to be going under the general title of Getting Us Up to Speed, and each of them will focus on 1 or 2 topics that we feel is instrumental in basically creating the current political landscape. So now in this first episode, episode 101, which we have titled Ready, Get, Set, Elect, we are going to be covering the election overall itself. So topic number 1 is going to be the U.S. primaries. We're going to be talking about Donald Trump. We'll let him being the nominee. And then we're going to transition to some of the candidates that might not have been chosen but still had a very big influence. So we're talking about like Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Bernie Sanders, and the third-party candidates. After that, we're going to be going over to topic 2, which is the election itself. Now, obviously, it's an interesting topic, like I said. That's going to be like Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton becoming a little mad, just a tad bit. And then, obviously, the changes in the Senate and the House. So with that said, how about I'll pass this over to Sean right now, and we will talk about, just before getting into the discussion, we'll talk about our general opinions of the U.S. primaries. So, Sean, you want to start off with that?
Thank you, Bilal. So, like you said, I'm Sean, and what makes our podcast different from other podcasts that you might notice about a few episodes into it is that we have very different political opinions, but the fact that we're very moderate when it comes to the political landscape helps us come together and talk about really substantial issues that help form the political landscape we currently find ourselves in today, rather than just having really, really brazen arguments. We try to come together, come to a moderate conclusion about things, just to make sure that both sides of the aisle are represented fairly. Yeah. Not necessarily equally, but fairly. Yeah. So basically, my stance is, before you hear Bilal's stance, my stance on politics right now is everything sucks. Basically, everything sucks. Personally, well, I was a Democrat for a huge part of my life, because I grew up in New Jersey, a very liberal state. I grew up in a very Democratic family. My uncle was a poll worker for the Democratic Party in the 2012 election. He hasn't been doing that since the 2016 election. In fact, he's kind of distanced himself from politics. After the election, in fact, I got red-pilled, if that may be the correct term for my case. So I got red-pilled. I didn't want to move completely to the right, and I did move completely to the right, and I found refuge in the center. Some of my views lean left, some of my views lean right, but the most important thing you're going to have to know about me is that I support no political party. In fact, I hate the idea of political parties because I have a Washingtonian point of view on political parties. I think it creates factions among the American people, something that he predicted back in the 18th century, and it rings extremely true today. It couldn't be truer today. In fact, people put party over politics, not only the supporters, but people who are in Washington right now. So although I lean right, I'm a moderate who leans right, I will never support the Republican Party because of the fact that they're the Republican Party and most of their members lean right rather than left. And now I'd like to pass the mic on to Bilal to allow him to share his thoughts on the political landscape and just his feelings about his political leanings.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sean. So I also grew up in New Jersey. I came from, I'm the son of Pakistani immigrants that came in the 90s. So my entire view of politics nowadays is very similar to Sean. Though I personally lean left, I'm not a new Democrat like Obama or Nancy Pelosi or those sort of people. Because they don't really have a strong leaning towards the left. They're more fiscally centrist, and then they are liberal for social issues. I'm liberal on both. I lean to the left on both. So what made Sean and I decide to make this podcast is that even though we have extremely varying opinions on the modern landscape, we're still able to talk them out. Like, we can have a dialogue.
Exactly.
And so that's what we want to do with this podcast. We want to make sure that a dialogue, which is being threatened by the modern landscape, continues to happen and makes sure that it spreads. So one of the things I actually like that Sean mentioned, which I think leads into the primaries, was factionalism. So I think that really started off, obviously, with the passing of the Affordable Care Act. So I think in the past 10 years, that's the most important event within the United States. Sorry, give us a short.
1 second.
Sorry about that. We are running a rather low-tech podcast. Obviously, this is our first try, so we're kind of just going with what we can acquire easily. So we're actually recording at a library right now in one of those smart labs that they have.
Yes.
So anyway, going back to the factionalism, with Obamacare passing in 2009, if I'm not mistaken, it did so without a single Republican vote. So that kind of created a really big split in the Democratic Party. You had people who were like, why are we losing seats in the House of Representatives completely in 2010, and then why are we losing the Senate to 2014? So for the U.S. primaries, on the left, that creates a very obvious reason as to why Bernie Sanders would succeed, or at least have a plausible chance at trying to actually get the nomination. Now, on the right, it's a very different story. You had, after a short while, you had the moderates, like John Boehner, people that wanted to work with Obama. That gave rise to people like Marco Rubio, people who are not as extreme. But then you had this weird kind of combination. It's like, we're not going to work with Obama, but we also want to say that we want to be bipartisan, and that's like Ted Cruz. And then you have the people that went absolutely like crazy. They veered super far right. Those are the people that eventually gave spawn to people like Donald Trump. And those were, what was it, the Freedom Caucus in the House of Representatives and the Tea Party Caucus in the Senate. So if we're looking at factionalism within the primaries, I think that's what led to it happening.
Exactly, and the primaries in the 2016 election was a huge decider in, well, not really decider, but it really gave light to how divided both parties' bases actually were. We're going to start with the Republican base because, like, that's the one where a lot of divisions were found because in the primary there were tons of people running. I don't exactly remember the exact amount, but over 10, definitely over 10. And from there you had the Bobby Jindals, you know, people who had no idea what the hell they were doing. Then you had the Ted Cruzes, the fiscally conservative, socially conservative people whom most of the conservative base from the 70s and 80s mostly aligned with. And you had the Marco Rubios, the more socially liberal, fiscally conservative people. And then came Donald Trump, who announced his campaign in, I believe it was mid-July. Yeah. At that point, it was really, he was an enigma. Nobody really knew what his core ideologies were. Nobody still knows what his core ideologies are because, you know, he tends to flip-flop on many issues, and he doesn't have a conservative or liberal ideology when it comes to social or fiscal issues. Yeah. And that gave rise to a very, very kind of what's the term?
You were never going to have anyone that you could like properly deal with. He was, if we're still talking about Donald Trump, he was able to mold whatever he wanted to say to work with the audience that he was facing. So if he was facing an audience that was in a place like Nevada or a place like Pennsylvania, he would change it to being like, oh, you know, we're not going to attack the Dreamers. Immigration is a intense topic. But if he was going in a place like Georgia, if he was going in a place like Nebraska, he would switch it to being extremely far right, which he was known for. That's where you get like the famous clips of him saying, you know, like when Mexicans when Mexicans are crossing the border, they're not bringing their breasts, they're rapists. That quote, that was like riling up the base initially. But he would always change it, so you never really knew where he stood. And so I think that was actually something he did, and from just a pragmatic standpoint, whether he did it intentionally or not. Just in terms of gathering people's votes, that was actually really smart. Because Hillary Clinton, she didn't really know how to respond. She was like, you have like 13 different opinions on this topic. So during the debates, after the primaries, and even during the primaries, during the Republican debates, no one could really like attack Donald Trump.
And not only that, but in order to understand the rise of Trump, you have to understand the average Trump supporter and the people who supported this man who had no political experience before he became the president of the United States, before he even became a candidate. He ran in 2000 for the Reform Party as a publicity stunt to kind of get himself on the front page before he eventually announced his reality TV show The Apprentice a few years later, in 2003, I believe it was. And then in 2012 for the Republican Party, in which he really just cursed in rallies. Not even rallies, like rallies of all of 100 people who wanted to hear him say the F word over and over again. So one statistic, this is on a Time magazine article from the author, Mr. Silver, And he said the family income of the typical Trump voter is $72,000. And that is clearly middle class. That's not wealthy, and it's not super high middle class either. So they're really in the middle of the bedrock of what the country is built on. In terms of their income and in terms of their regional where they were brought up.
States,
yeah, exactly. Where they were in terms of the states, you could see that there was a disillusionment with the urbanization of Washingtonian politics, especially under the Obama era, where he wanted to incorporate dreamers into the country to kind of pander to the Californians, to pander to the New Yorkers, the Floridians, the people who were on the coastal states.
Yeah.
And because most of these dreamers, these illegal immigrants, these people whom weren't really being vetted as well as the Republicans would have liked, they were coming into states that were heavily Republican. They were coming to the Middle East. They were coming to places like Texas, the middle part of the country, and they felt this disconnect between Washington, especially Democratic Washington, and themselves.
Wait, one quick thing. You said Middle East instead of the Midwest. Just
Midwest,
that's
I'm sorry. My bad. That's a completely different topic.
Yeah, I was thinking of like some random factory worker from Michigan, like ending up in Baghdad. He's like, yo, salam alaikum. But anyway, Sean brought up the Time magazine article. And if I could just quote it for a second, I think it provides some really nice insight. Regarding Trump supporter, he says, quote, "These are people who should be doing well in the post-recession. Instead, they feel punished by the economy and alienated from the political process," end quote. So I think that obviously makes a very nice statement as to how Donald Trump was able to attract them. These were people who had lost their jobs in 2008, and they're suffering from the increased automation. The increased
automation and the number of factory jobs have also decreased. Now, another thing that I found very interesting in that Time magazine article was that in the 80s and 90s, the incomes of men and women with college degrees rose substantially, whereas the incomes of trade workers, people who are in the Middle East, the Midwest, they didn't really grow. They grew only about 1% to 2%, whereas the incomes of people who are graduating from college, mostly urbanized colleges, such as the colleges from the East and West Coast, they rose substantially, and this disconnect between Washington, the urban America, and rural America really started to widen, despite there being Republican presidents all throughout the 80s and throughout the beginning of the 90s. And that's when the disconnect really began to happen. And if you see another graphic, it's not in this article, but I saw it somewhere before, the number of filibusters under the Clinton administration had rose almost 900% under the Gingrich kind of Senate. When Gingrich was Senate Majority Leader and Clinton was president, you can see the amount of filibusters rose almost 900 to 1,000%. And that just shows you the divide between both of the parties trying to pander to a different base at this point in time, because incomes had fluctuated to such a degree that people on the coasts, they were getting a higher income, whereas people in the Midwest, the people who are now gravitating more and more to the fringy Republican side, they began to feel a disconnect because they were not getting heavy income. Their jobs were faltering. They were losing their jobs in droves. The coal industry was going to hell at this point because of the EPA regulations, solar energy, the sector improving, increasing, the IT sector increasing, Silicon Valley's rise to prominence in the 90s and early 2000s, and that's where you have this divide of people who were in the Midwest and the people who were going into the fringe Republican side.
Yeah, they felt like they didn't have anyone in Congress that really was vocal and in representing them. So one of the things, if you look at the, not just with the, actually I'll start off with the Democratic primaries really quickly.
Yeah.
While I open, can you open a picture of a map of the Republican primaries? Like who won which states? So for Sanders, a lot of people, even if, this is just a simple fact, a lot of Republicans touted Sanders as the socialist. And to be fair, in a lot of regards, that's very true. He's very far left than any mainstream politician has been in quite a while. But one thing he was able to do that Clinton was not able to do in her primaries was to get Michigan and Wisconsin. Now, this is like dead center of the Rust Belt, which itself is dead. Because they lost jobs. They felt that no one was representing them. Instead of investing in, more factory workers, companies were going overseas. That's what gave rise to this mentality within Trump supporters that, Mexico immigrants are taking our jobs. That's what led to him becoming prominent. And even in the primaries, red is Donald Trump, right? Like the hard red is Donald Trump.
So what Bilal is talking about right now is a map of who won which state in the Republican primaries. Yellow being Ted Cruz, red being Donald Trump. There's an overwhelming amount of red. Purple being Marco Rubio, and blue being John Kasich.
So yeah, we will include that within the video or in a link at the bottom. But if you see, the two states that Sanders won, that Clinton lost in the primaries were Sanders and he lost the state of Sanders. No, he lost the state of Michigan, and he won the state of Michigan, Wisconsin. Iowa, it's kind of a toss-up because that's like the first primary, so obviously he didn't have that much name recognition yet, so you can pass that up either way. But it's also interesting to note, he got Indiana and West Virginia. Now, West Virginia is relatively hard red now, but it voted for Bill Clinton. So if you got the right candidate, you could get that through.
Exactly.
And then, once again, going with the same breed, because Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump were appealing to the same base, just with slightly different... economically, they were appealing to the same base.
Yeah.
Trump was able to win Pennsylvania, and he did it pretty handedly, too. So to win such a big state like Pennsylvania, once again, its western portions are part of the Rust Belt. Pennsylvania is not just Philadelphia, and it's not just an extension of the New York metro area. It is a living, breathing portion of the Midwest. So if Trump was able to win Pennsylvania so handedly, it should have given a sign to the Democrats at the time that they needed someone who was going to appeal to those people that had lost their jobs, that didn't feel like they would be represented. And when they didn't do that, when the Democrats thought, you know what, we're going to keep this Clinton, Obama, Pelosi kind of candidate, one who's very center, one who doesn't have strong convictions on any topic. When they made that play, when the Democrats showed that they were completely fine with rigging the primaries, that's when they lost the ball. That's when they completely shot themselves in the foot. And in some ways, it didn't make Trump's candidacy or Trump's presidency confirmed or like set in stone, but it was like the cement starting to settle. Like you could change it, but unless you had some very strong action, it was going to happen either way.
Exactly. And if you see the states, especially in the Midwest, in the primaries before the presidential election, people who overwhelmingly, in fact, won the Midwest. I don't know why there's no Wyoming statistics for the
Wyoming doesn't exist. Wyoming is a fake state.
I mean, sorry, not Wyoming. There's like I don't know what. It's next to Utah.
Colorado.
Colorado. I don't know why there's no Colorado. Anyway, and North Dakota for some reason. Anyway, whatever. We're gonna move on without those two states because who cares? So anyway, what you're seeing here is that in the Republican primary, states like Oregon, Montana, North Dakota, I know from before, South Dakota, Nebraska, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, these states were all won by Trump. And then if you look at the Democratic primary, a majority of these states were won by Bernie Sanders as well. And that's where you can kind of see the socioeconomic appeal of both Trump and Sanders coming through, because these votes are from people who are in the disenfranchised Midwest. Factory jobs, coal jobs, they're falling. The incomes aren't rising as much as urbanized jobs. They can't even move to the urban areas because they've got farms there, they've got family there, and it's just they're tied to their heritage and where they're basically from. So they would ideally want the Midwest to do a lot better than they're doing now. They want to catch up in terms of income levels, job rates, the unemployment rates, which there's a huge gap between urban unemployment rates and rural unemployment rates, Midwestern unemployment rates in the United States. So the fact that Sanders and Trump won those two, won most of the Midwest in large numbers, kind of shows that despite them having completely different messages, almost like they're appealing to identical bases. They're appealing to people who are economically disenfranchised. Sanders is a guy who is proposing a $15 minimum wage, single-payer health care. Basically the government should be given more powers to take care of its citizens rather than corporations which kind of prioritize shareholder equity and money given to their shareholders and their top-tier level bosses, kind of. Whereas Trump didn't really have a clear message on this, but people from the Midwest were very taken aback by his message, his pseudo-populist message, if I may say so myself, that he's not politically correct. He will not kind of bow down to the Democratic or Republican establishment to kind of come up with deals that compromises the Midwest for urbanization of the country, for the urban areas of the United States doing better and better at the expense of the Midwest. So you have that north-south divide, but in this case, it's the coastal states and the Midwest.
See, what's really interesting, I feel like the reason that Trump fared so well in California, considering the fact that it is overall a liberal state, I mean, like UC Berkeley, it doesn't get much more liberal than that.
Mm-hmm.
The reason he won that is just because in states like those, when you have such a strong blue majority in the primaries for a conservative party, they're just going to like tend to the far right either way. So I think that's kind of why California veered that way. But obviously, California in the primaries, it's important. So you don't have nearly as many. They understood that they were never going to turn California the same way that even though there are a lot of Democrats numerically in Texas, just in terms of the overall population, you're never going to win Texas unless you have like literally Jesus who comes down and says he's Democrat. You're never going to win Texas. And even then, some of the we're going to be mentioning this in a little bit. Some of the fake news would say, is Jesus really a Democrat or is he just appealing to Goldman Sachs?
And I think I now want to move on to.
Wait, if I could just make one more point.
Oh yeah.
What is if you look at the map for the primaries, right? Two of the states that Bernie Sanders won, which I think are very interesting, are Utah and Colorado. So if you want to compare that to Bill Clinton lost those two states. And once again, this is like that sort of area where it's not densely populated. You're not going to have economic progress in the form of like investment. You're not going to have it in the terms of technology. You're going to have it from like factory jobs, from real American jobs. Bernie Sanders was able to appeal to those two states, amongst others. He was able to appeal to the states that Hillary Clinton just couldn't. Because when you look at Hillary Clinton, the one thing you see is just Democratic money. You don't see anything else but corruption. So that, once again, if I could say, before passing on to Sean, that's what made Hillary Clinton such a poor candidate.
Exactly. She represented a brand of, just the concluding point on my part, she kind of confirmed the fears of people who were not part of the Democratic Party, that the Democratic establishment were kind of these war hawk political insiders that Hillary Clinton so eloquently embodied, which really disgusted a lot of people on the right and a lot of people on the left, which led them to vote for Sanders and had the Never Hillary / Bernie or Bust movements. And now, Bilal said a little bit earlier that the fake news kind of was also divided, well, fake news as coined by Donald Trump, was divided between Republican and Democrat as well. And in fact, if you look at who had, I'm just talking about, actually no, I'm going to compare the Democratic and Republicans candidates. If you look at the 2016 presidential ad spending, the people who had the most media coverage of free press coverage after Trump, we're going to get to Trump later, Jeb Bush, 82 million, Marco Rubio, 55 million, and then Sanders came in at 28.4 million, and Clinton at 27.9 million. Cruz came in at 22 million, and those are the top five.
Just a quick note, though, that is, just to give the audience context, that is up until February 2016, so that's right before primaries proper started. So, just keep going.
Up till February, and now, remember, Jeb Bush, had the second most kind of capital spent on free press for his media coverage, $82 million. Donald Trump, up until February, at this exact same point, had $2 billion worth of free press. $2 billion worth of free press of coverage from about July-ish to February, which is mind-boggling when you come to realize that he hadn't even won the primaries at this point, and they were still up to November 8th. So this number probably tripled, quadrupled, even quintupled at this point. That amount of free press kind of allowed him to have this herd mentality impact on people who started voting for him in droves. And at this point, his influence hadn't only spread to the Midwest, it spread all the way to the coast. And this is where you had the protests against people, against radical leftist groups, radical right groups, the alt-right, in fact, the rise of the 4chan, Reddit alt-right guys.
4chan with the god.
4chan, yeah.
Never forget 4chan. I keep going.
Yeah, so, and the fact that there was such a divide, you started to, and I'll get to why this is the case in a second, but when his prominence started to come into the coastal states, that's when you started seeing the protests between leftist and alt-right groups. And this is when the media started covering them, and that's why you really understand why the Midwest is disenfranchised by the media, Washington, and urbanized America. Because when the Midwest started getting more and more kind of Trumpian, started moving away from the Cruz Republicans, the Rubio Republicans, the Jeb Bush Republicans, the guys who were more on the moderate side and more on the politically correct side, people still treated them as flyover country. It's like they're going to vote Republican anyway. They've historically voted Republican. It's not a macro trend, a macro political trend that we should be concerned about. And then as soon as Trump started spreading his rhetoric, as soon as Trump's rhetoric started spreading onto the coastal areas, that's when you started seeing large-scale protests, large-scale media coverage, and that's where the $2 billion figure comes from. Because he was the showman of the election cycle.
Yeah. The election cycle is so weird when you look at the Republican side because there's so many different people and so many different people spending absurd amounts of money. So what was it? When was oh my god, what was it called? When was the Super PAC? Super PACs were made in like 2012. That was the first election that they properly were made in, right?
Yeah.
Because Citizens United was 2011. It might have been the same year, actually. So, like, that's when, like, they started pumping in money. So you can see the same thing with the spending disparity between Obama in 2008 2012, McCain in 2008, and Mitt Romney in 2012. It's so vast because people are like, whoever has more money is going to be able to swing certain states. So when you had people with the great name recognition or people who are just came from wealthy families or powerful families, they thought that they could get along faster. They thought that they would need a super PAC, but then Trump comes in. He has no need for support from any of these groups because he can fund his own campaign. He can build a brand by saying that, people are funding me, people are making me keep going in this primary process, just like Bernie Sanders did with the $27 slogan. Because he had the average donation of $27. So Trump, he was the oddball, and because of that, he had no hesitancy in saying whatever he needed to keep going. What's interesting, obviously Kasich kept going a little bit farther than Cruz. That's kind of irrelevant because he never really had. The only state he won was like his home state of like Iowa. Ohio. Because he's the governor of Ohio. And he worked. He has pretty good name recognition. Cruz, obviously, we've known him for a while. He's the one that filibustered during the Obama administration. Rubio also, he might have appealed to. What do you say? He definitely appealed to the South. He definitely appealed to. Would you say Mexicans, like Latinos, stuff like that?
Yeah, Rubio, like Miami, Florida.
Florida,
those, like southern Florida, that area.
Yeah. And then Bush. I think it's important to look at Bush because this should have been the first sign that something was about to go, okay, not terribly, terribly wrong, but he dropped out just after Super Tuesday. So after Super Tuesday, when you have the person with arguably the biggest name recognition within the past, 25 years, 30 years, two presidents have had his name, Bush. It's just synonymous with power in the Republican Party nowadays. When he goes down, and he's one of the first major candidates to actually go down right before Rubio or far before Rubio, Cruz, and Kasich. That should have been telling the Republican Party, okay, this man Trump, you need to get one candidate if you want to keep this current brand of Republicanism to be able to get the nomination and go forward. Like obviously, a bunch of other people, when they dropped out, their votes kind of filtered to Trump. There wasn't really like any scattering because otherwise it would have been an open. And it would have been an open convention. But obviously you had Perry. Perry tried to run in 2012. So everyone knows him because of his oops moment. So he drops out. Then you have Walker, Jindal, Graham, Pataki, Huckabee. And now as these people go up, they have like some name recognition. They drop out. Their votes filter to Trump. Then you have Paul, Santorum, Fiorina, which I don't think Fiorina ever really had a chance on either side. Because Democrats themselves had such sexism. They were trying to...
Also, Spirit thought spare thought for Fiorina, because after she was kind of chosen as Ted Cruz's
Oh,
campaign vice president,
never forget.
like, come on, she was being propped up for a job that she would realistically never had. Even she knew at that point she was never going to have
That's
that
like
job.
the original Scaramucci. It's like you have,
Yeah,
you have the
you're
job
being
for-
promised a job, and then you got Lennied from Of Mice and Men. Just turn around,
Yeah.
shot in the back of the head, told to think about the flowers and the rabbits,
Oh,
and you're done.
dude.
She had no plausible chance in which she could win. Yeah, continue.
Yeah, dude, but seriously, that's so true. Because Fiorina, she's like, trust me, I'll become the vice president. It's like, will you really though? Like, come on, let's be
You're
serious
not
now. Sexism. This is just like not even Republican, just overall in America, it's pretty rampant. Like in 2008, personally, I'm gonna be completely honest. One of the reasons I think Obama won the nominations is because sexism in the United States is far worse or far. It's there's far more sexism in the United States than there's racism, so I think that kind of just factored into it. But
And you have to understand, in 2008, Benghazi hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
All that stuff hadn't happened yet, and the email scandal, especially those two main things that were the reasons why Republicans had leverage on top of Hillary Clinton during the presidential campaign, during the campaign season. They were non-existent back when Obama was running.
Yeah.
So the fact that he still defeated her, a person who was first lady for 8 years, who was then senator afterwards, who was the first lady of Arkansas for a couple of years, I don't remember how many exactly. She had a lot of political experience. She was the lawyer. She was present during the Nixon trials. She was a political lawyer for a huge part of her life before she was the first lady of Arkansas. So the fact that she lost to this guy that just gave one awesome, very, very poignant DNC speech, that really shows you, there is definitely a level of sexism that is associated with that, but the war hawk aspect of Hillary Clinton that started coming through in the 2016 election wasn't completely present in the 2008 election.
exactly, like Obama's speech in 2004. I'm gonna be honest, it's a spectacular speech, but that gives him name recognition that allows him to get into the Senate. But that in and of itself is not going to be enough to get you a nomination when you have Hillary Clinton, who's been working in the Democratic Party for years before him. I mean, just 10 years prior to Obama being in the Senate, he wasn't even a household name. Barely anyone knew about him. Meanwhile, Mrs. Clinton, she was the first lady. She had been trying to get bills passed. She was well known. She would go on to be Secretary of State. Like, she had massive name recognition going up to 2016. But then you know who also has massive name recognition? Trump. His name is synonymous with wealth, with power. So then people kind of just got sucked up into that. So then when you have, like, once again, when you have Bush drop out, everyone is like, oh shit, what do we do? So then Carson realizes he has no chance, so he drops out. So does Rubio. They jump ship. So the only people that really stay in, by the end of it, it was just like Cruz and Trump. And I think Cruz understood that if he were to there was not going to be a scenario where Cruz came out with the nomination because of delegate points. He was not going to be able to get the points needed. So I think him and Kasich kind of ran on behalf of the Republican Party just to be able to draw enough points away from Trump that he would not reach the threshold. So then it would go to an open convention, at which point, like the Democrats rigged their primary, the Republicans would do so technically within the rules, but kind of it's like an asshole move.
Yeah.
They would be able to confirm that Trump would not be the nominee for the Republican Party. Because as soon as that happened, they were like, okay, let's try and get a president in. Let's try and get that three-way, that three-piece, House of Representatives, Senate, and the executive branch. So then that's when the unity started. That's when Mitch McConnell gave in. That's when Ryan gave in. That's when everyone started giving their endorsements. And that's when Trump really became the great threat that he was. And then obviously, I tried to look up this name, Sean, but it's kind of escaping me. Who was the, you mentioned the email scandal, which became very important later on. Who was the, Chaffetz, that's his name. When James Comey gave the letter, he was basically telling Chaffetz that, there might be a reason to reopen.
Yeah, because Chaffetz was the chair of the House Intelligence Committee.
He was the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, so he gave that warning. And then he didn't want it to go public yet. He wanted, like any good investigation, you want to keep it under the radar for a while until it's in the public interest to bring it to light. So then when he told Chaffetz, and Chaffetz is like, we need to tell everyone. And then he makes the big announcement. He's like, the House Intelligence Committee, CIA, FBI, we're going to investigate Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is working. The reopening, they were going to reopen the email investigation. And then Trump is like, thank you for that. Because that's what secured it for him. If that hadn't happened, if it's not Comey's fault. The Democrats love to blame Comey, and once again, that's kind of going into the hypocritical nature of the Democratic Party. Because back in the day, they hated Comey, now they can't get enough of him. But like with Chaffetz especially, he might have like turned the tide on the entire election. He had the power, and then he decided to take action. Is it morally corrupt? Yes. Is it politically sleazy? Yes. But at the end of the day, partisanship, which as we've gone on and on about, is extremely present within the House of Representatives, because you had the formation of the Freedom Caucus. That's what got Trump into the presidency, because Chaffetz just couldn't resist making sure that he could turn everything he could against Hillary Clinton, even if it wasn't fair, even if it wasn't true.
Exactly. And now, you want to start talking about the general elections?
Yeah, sure. So like we've talked. Actually, we haven't talked about. We talked a little bit about Bernie Sanders, so we can go with that. How about we talk a little bit about Johnson, who is the Libertarian nominee, and Stein, who's the Green Party nominee.
Yeah, so these people are largely accredited by mostly Hillary Clinton as taking the votes away from fringy Democrats as well as moderate Democrats who just didn't know who to vote for.
Yeah.
Because there was just so much dirt on both sides of the aisle, especially Hillary Clinton, which probably at which point she hadn't expected. And I mean, I will be completely honest. I did support Gary Johnson just because of the fact that I hated both candidates. All right,
His name is Johnson. How do you not support it?
Field the Johnson,
Field
man.
the Johnson.
Just field the Johnson.
Yeah.
So, of these two candidates, Jill Stein actually, surprisingly, had a longer running campaign by 29 weeks. By 29 weeks, and that's longer than average. Average is about 8 months. So she kept on going and going and going, and that's why in the general election, I think she got a little above 1% of the vote. But you have to understand, they weren't running on a huge platform. Jill Stein herself was a Green Party candidate, anti-war, obviously, pro-carbon tax, huge climate change advocate. In fact, 9/11 truther, which may come as a surprise, but during the Green Party town hall that she was a part of in CNN, she was asked a question about whether or not 9/11 is legit and whether or not it was a government conspiracy, and she said in an extremely vague manner that it needs to be looked into, the case needs to be reopened, and the investigation needs to be reopened, which did perturb a lot of people, but I mean, to be honest, it's not that outlandish if you see all the evidence. But that's another argument.
Oh my God, are we going into 9/11 truth? We will have an interesting discussion around that.
Yeah. Interestingly, Gary Johnson raised about $500,000 more during his entire campaign than Jill Stein, even though he ran a campaign that was about 8 months. That was 29 weeks.
But if you think about it, effectively, like in the grand scheme of things, $500,000, what is that, like a billboard? Like $500,000 is not going to make a difference in terms of like total popular vote. He got way more popular votes than her. He got close to 4.5 million. Jill Stein got like 1.5 in terms of percentage of the population. That's 3.28%, which that's impressive. Like if 3.28% of like Michigan or Wisconsin had changed, maybe Clinton would get the election. Now, please don't misunderstand. I was about to say misunderestimate. Oh my God, like George Bush. Yeah. No, please don't misunderstand me. There we go. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not blaming the loss on the election on Johnson, on Stein. That's just them being, they're running for their beliefs, and that's completely fine, and that's what you need to have in a government, in a country that's as partisan as this. You need people that are willing to have different points of view that will kind of mesh different points of the political spectrum. At the end of the day, Clinton's loss was just due to her being a poor candidate that no one liked. So people who say, like Hillary Clinton herself, who say that Johnson, that Stein, that Bernie Sanders, that they led to the collapse of her campaign and her ultimate defeat, they're just wrong. Like, she had the votes. She had more votes than Donald Trump. She just didn't pay attention to the regions that needed her attention. People in Ohio, people that had lost their jobs, people in Wisconsin that felt that they might not have enough money to get to the end of the week, to pay their bills, to get food on the table for their children.
Exactly, not even that, but if you see Jill Stein after Trump won the election, she gave almost 99.5% of her campaign funds. She had $4.17 million when he won, and she ended up having $105,132 by December because of the recount campaign. So she definitely tried to make sure that the election was fought in a fair manner. She gave up almost $4 million of her own campaign money to do that, and then you have someone like Hillary Clinton saying that she's one of the reasons why she lost She has no absolution for people that didn't vote for her, and that is the kind of narcissism that people look unfavorably upon her for.
Yeah, the things with Stein, it's like regardless of your opinions on her, she at least was like, we've had mishaps in Florida, and if you have a mishap in a state like as important as Florida, maybe that would mean that you should have a recount in other states. And obviously, Florida in the past many times has been the deciding factor in an election. So Johnson saying that she wants a recount in certain states, that's completely fine. And it's her right to use the money that she has at her disposal to fight for her beliefs because of Citizens United, she has the ability to do that. So when Hillary Clinton then, like Sean said, turns around, spits in her face, and says, "You're the reason I lost the election," she's being ludicrous. Johnson, at the end of the day, she was trying to fight for Clinton to get elected. She was trying to make it seem like she had Stein was trying to say that, maybe Clinton lost the election unfairly. Maybe there might have been a miscount. Maybe Russia actually did tamper the election, which we will get to eventually if there's actually any report by Mueller. So, and that's like a couple months down the line. But at the time, this was a very prominent idea. So what Stein is saying is maybe we shouldn't take this election so lightly. Maybe we should recount the votes. And then Hillary Clinton, being the narcissist, being the grumpy old woman that she is, she decided to say, you know what? How about no? How about we just have this? How about we just say, I need someone to blame. I'll blame you. So that. Unless, Sean, you got anything else to say? I think that concludes topic number 1, the U.S. primaries.
Yes.
We will take a short break, and then we will come back to with topic number 2, which will be the 2016 U.S. general elections and the results in the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the executive branch. So we'll get right back to you in a little bit.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Real Talk with Shan and Bilal. So, now we are going to move on to topic number 2, the U.S. general elections. We were talking about the primaries and each of the candidates, why their rise to prominence happened, essentially. And now we're going to talk about Trump versus Hillary. And the first question that is posed for us is, how was Donald Trump able to beat all the expectations and beat the strongly preferred Hillary Clinton in the general election, something that nobody saw coming? Everyone expected a landslide for Hillary Clinton.
Oh boy, Hillary. Okay, like we've been saying, Hillary Clinton, the flawed candidate that she was not campaigning in the states that she needed to. She thought, wrongly so, that she would get Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, just because her would have been predecessor, just because Obama had, and just because Bill Clinton had. What she failed to realize was that the political and the economic landscape in that area and in the nation overall had changed completely since the time of Clinton. She was going with this idea of the New Democrats having a stronghold in the blue states. The thing is, the idea of a blue state has changed completely. Like during Clinton's time, Minnesota turned blue, Georgia turned blue, and West Virginia turned blue because you were still feeling the very. Just because George Bush was so bad, 41, you were kind of still able to experience the aftermath of the Southern strategy with Nixon, which the repercussions are still going on today. Mm-hmm. So she thought, you know what, maybe we'll be able to secure those. Meanwhile, Trump, he understood as if I'm going to secure, there's some states that are just going to vote red no matter what. Like that state like Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, states like those. But Trump was like, I need a campaign in the states that I'm able to appeal to because of how different I am. So that states like Pennsylvania.
Exactly, and in fact, you mentioned Pennsylvania, Bilal. An autopsy from Business Insider and from a bunch of polls found that 13% of voters, accumulative, in Wisconsin, Florida, and Pennsylvania, 3 very closely contested states, ended up narrowly deciding Trump winning. That's okay.
You said autopsy, dude. That's so true because the nation died on that. Oh Jesus Christ.
Oh boy.
I'm kidding. But
I'll get back to the actual numbers.
Yeah, while you pull that up, I'm looking at a map that shows by percentage what states were won most handedly by each candidate. So if you look at this, it's really concerning for Hillary Clinton. She was barely able to win some states. So like if you're looking at something like California, Maryland, and Massachusetts, those are the ones that she won by the greatest margin. But then New York, if you're able to look at that, Sean, she won New York by around the same measure that Trump won Indiana and Ohio. So that's actually, and Iowa. So that's actually a pretty close margin.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you look at, in terms of number of states that Trump is able to win, even though California has a far greater point count than these states, they have a sizable representation. This is states like Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Oklahoma, what is that? Arkansas, what is that? Alabama. And then states like Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia. He has, in terms of sheer number of states, more that will vote for him because they're hard Republican states. And then if you look at a map that shows the counties that Hillary Clinton won, she won far fewer counties than Obama did. And Trump even got a sizable amount of counties in California, in New York. If you look at the amount of counties he won.
And in Pennsylvania. I mean, like, it was a very closely contested race. But just look at Pennsylvania and Florida. Clinton won a handful of counties. I mean, I don't think she won more than like 10, 15, whereas Trump won over 20 to 30. And I was going back to Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and there was one more. Florida. Those states accumulated about how many? That's 26, 46. About 75 electoral votes right there. 13% of the voters accumulated from those 4 states ended up giving Donald Trump the election. Because that's 75 electoral votes. Because remember, electoral votes are all that matters at this point in the general election. It doesn't matter how, like, the margin by which the candidates win. That gave him the election. He won the states. And this is where I will give Jared Kushner some credit. He ended up moneyballing the states where it mattered. Where it didn't matter how many votes he won by, whether it mattered, it mattered that he won. In states like California, Washington, Minnesota, Illinois, most of the New England states, New Jersey, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Clinton blew out Donald Trump. There was no hope that Donald Trump was going to win those states, even before they started counting. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, if you look at their live broadcast of those states, you will see that they called him before like the vote count even started, because they knew Clinton was going to blow Trump out of the water. Whereas the states that Trump won, the blue wall, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, even Florida, and both the Carolinas, these are states that are usually toss-up states, and that were coined as toss-up states even before this election. And he won by a handful of votes. Some by a couple 10,000, some by a couple 100,000, some by a couple thousand, in fact. And that was a very good strategy from the Trump campaign and gave him the election eventually because he got those important electoral votes. He campaigned very, very soundly.
I think this also goes into the fact that since he is a businessman, he knows how to appeal and he understands how to work with the numbers. So exactly. when it comes down to it, he was able to convince the states that he needed to just to vote for him and just do so with a little hesitancy. Like states like Michigan, Wisconsin, they didn't really mind voting for Trump because Trump was giving them what they wanted. While Clinton was not giving any promises, he was giving all of the promises that they wanted. And once again, there's another map that I will show you. If you look at this, almost all of Iowa, all of Michigan, Wisconsin, a lot of those states are voting for Obama in 2012 because at the same time they thought that the Democratic Party was going to be the one to support them. Exactly. So this area right here, Central America or Central United States, that's the state. That's the area that she was able to convince. You're going to have some areas in the Southeast that are just going to vote Democrat due to the demographics of the area. Some African Americans tend to vote Democrat in the South. Non-evangelicals tend to vote Democrat in the South. So those are the places that they're going to win naturally.
Exactly. And the point that I mentioned about the 13% of voters from those 4 toss-up states, toss-up states that effectively gave Donald Trump the election, gave Donald Trump a heavy amount of the electoral votes that he was going after, and that kind of explains why the polls were so wrong. And these polls, they played a huge part in deciding the outcome of this election. A huger part than most people would probably credit them for. There's actually
people like in 20.
Yeah, this is very important. Not important, but like ironically hilarious in hindsight tweet from the Huffington Post that gave Clinton a 98.1
Oh,
chance.
dude.
98.1 chance of winning
I
the
remember
election.
that.
Donald Trump 1.3% chance. And it's polls like that that really drive the American people up a wall because of how overconfident these left-wing websites are at how she was going to win, she was going to blow it out, this election cycle was absolutely over, don't even count on it. because you know what? Because of the fact that they didn't take into account that these toss-up states could have gone either way. They assume that these toss-up states, because they've historically gone to Clinton, because they've historically gone to Obama, most of those counties, they could not have imagined that most of the counties, born in Pennsylvania, Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, would go in favor of Trump by not that many votes. And they already had states like Nevada, California, Oregon, Washington, Minnesota, historically Democratic states that did end in blowouts for Hillary Clinton. They took that at heart because they, I think, were prioritizing the popular vote ahead of the electoral vote and thought that the two would go hand in hand. They didn't understand the fact that in the toss-up states, about a couple hundred votes makes a world of difference when you're looking at the counties.
Yeah, like Clinton. What happened, like you mentioned, with the Clinton campaign is that they bred complacency. They didn't think something that, like at the very end of the election cycle, which turned some voters, was a random mentioning of some email scams, the rebirth of that. They didn't think that Benghazi was going to be as strong as an issue as it would be. And she really thinks, and I feel so bad for her, she thinks that even though she's the most qualified, she's the most likable. Like, okay, lady, we understand you're the first lady. We understand that you've been a senator. We understand that you've been a secretary of state. We understand all of that, okay? But at the end of the day, we just don't like you. We don't like your policies. We don't like the fact that you don't have a personality. We don't like the fact that you're going to be getting all the you feel so poorly in your own convictions and beliefs that you need to get questions during the debates beforehand. We don't like the fact that you've been bribed by massive companies to fulfill their needs. We don't like the fact that you're a war hawk. And we don't like the fact that you're not appeasing to our needs. Hillary Clinton, she has this massive ego. She thinks that, you know, she has all the experience she needs. She should be a sure shot. But she's not because no one likes her. She
essentially thought that she was entitled to the presidency.
Exactly. She felt she was entitled to it. Not that people she thought that she thought that she deserved it, and not that she needed to be able to convince the American people that she was going to be able to portray their beliefs. Now, if you look at this, if in states like Michigan and Wisconsin, and not really in Pennsylvania, really Michigan, Gary Johnson may have played a factor. I'm looking at a map that shows pie charts, and it shows each relative percentage of the vote. Texas is actually relatively close.
Yeah.
That's
if it weren't for Gary Johnson and Jill Stein, in fact, it could have been 50-50. I'm looking at the pie charts, yeah.
Virginia is really close, which is okay. Virginia is even closer than West Virginia, even though they've kind of like switched roles, and that was kind of surprising. Like West Virginia used to be solidly Democrat, Virginia used to be probably Republican. Then like Clinton and Obama kind of switched that. Mm-hmm. The fact that Republicans are able to secure West Virginia and Republicans are losing Virginia, even though the makeup of the populations is relatively similar, it just shows the wide-ranging opinions on Hillary Clinton. And then Illinois. Illinois is way closer than you would expect it to be. Same thing with New York. Are there any other states? New Hampshire and New Hampshire was really close, like amazingly close.
Yeah. I'm looking at
I'm surprised.
We'll try to link as many of these maps as we can on the description of the video that we'll upload.
Yeah, as we mentioned, like we're not going to be filming likely the first one or two podcasts. Soon enough, you'll be seeing our beautiful faces. But until then, we're either going to be linking it, if possible, with the video. Like as we mentioned, it might pop up on screen, or a link might pop up in the description. We might have like a little annotation that you can just click on that. But we're going to be working on that throughout the time and throughout as we release more and more podcasts.
Exactly.
I'm surprised that. Sorry, do you want to say something about the?
No. Go ahead.
What surprises me is that Hillary Clinton was able to secure New Hampshire, even though George Bush had been able to win New Hampshire, Clinton was able to win New Hampshire. I would have thought that would have been easier for Trump to win, but instead he went for Maine. So that's.
Yeah, and Maine is one that splits its electoral vote. So I kind of understood his strategy, but it was only 1 or 2 electoral votes. I didn't think that was sound strategy. But guess what? He's the president. He won.
He
I
won.
Think he knew better than
Not
us.
my president. The afterward. That's going to be the topic of our next podcast. What happened afterwards? But Hillary Clinton got smacked. She didn't even. She won a plurality in Minnesota. She didn't even win a majority. A plurality. And if you look at the states that she won, because she only won a plurality, it is really concerningly close. Like, just to rattle off a couple of names that Trump won with a majority. He won North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, Minnesota. Not quite those, but he won Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. All these states he won with a majority. Georgia, he won with a majority. Was that South Carolina, North Carolina is too close to call. I can't really say that. And then there are the states that he wins. And then Clinton, she won most of her states with the plurality. Like, she won Minnesota with the plurality. She won whatchamacallit? She Colorado, New Mexico, what was it, Arizona? All these. Oh, dude.
Oh, and
not Arizona.
Just want to bring up a quick point. We were talking about the counties that both candidates had won. Trump won 2,623 counties. Hillary won 489.
Ooh.
So that should give you just an estimate about how popular he was in a majority of the counties in the country, and just how much those 100,000, 10,000 votes mattered in each county that ended up giving him the county, ended up giving him a stronghold on the state in which he won a majority of those counties.
There's also a famous map from the 2008-2012 election. Obviously, Obama said that we are red states and blue states. And I clicked shopping on Google. But, what's interesting is if you look at the map, it really is purple. 2012 really is like the epitome of purple America. You're obviously going to have some places that are far more liberal. Like, Vermont, Massachusetts, they have strong blue populations. Right by the Mississippi River, you have some blue populations. And then Republicans are going to have the same thing. The Midwest, places like Nebraska, Kansas, those are just naturally going to tend red. But then if you want to look at a purple map for this election, the red has grown astronomically and the blue has shrunk. So, like, there was very little like hesitancy for some states to vote Republican. There was far less purple America and far more red America, just because I just can't get over the fact how unlikable Hillary Clinton is. And the fact that I'm still in shock. Like, I still remember the day that Trump was declared president-elect, which was that Wednesday, because it was too close. Let's be real. CNN and like MSNBC, they were saying it's too close to call. It's too close to call.
They thought it was too close to call, and by then Donald Trump was already giving his acceptance speech.
Yeah, I was like, just give up at that point.
Yeah.
Like even Fox News, which is like obviously Republican, they in 2008 and 2012 they had given Obama the election by like 11:30. But like, if you look at certain states after Pennsylvania called, just pack up your show and head out of town because you've lost the election. You can't lose Florida and say, you know what, there's still a chance.
There's still a chance.
Trust me on this.
Yeah, we need to win Ohio and Pennsylvania and the entire Rust Belt.
Yeah.
And we got this, man.
Yeah, like Texas will turn blue. Trust me on this. It's like, no.
It's not going to happen.
No, Wolf Blitzer. It's just not going to happen.
So after the polls, we talked a little bit about that. We talked a little bit about the divide and how red America grew from purple America in 2012 and 2008. And now we'd like to wrap up this first episode with the changes that have occurred in the Senate, the House, and just overall Washington's landscape, the political landscape.
So what happened is, in terms of, obviously, the Republicans have still kept a majority in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, so both chambers of Congress still are controlled by Republicans. The leadership also did not change. Sometimes following an election, you'll have like an ousting of certain leaders. Like in 2015, following that election, with the growth of the Tea Party and the Freedom Caucus, you had the ousting of John Boehner. And you would think something similar would happen to this. You're having a very radical president, but still rather pragmatic, moderate leaders in Congress. So you still have Paul Ryan, who is really the good boy, the one that's able to unite the Republican Party in the House. You still have him as the leader in the as Speaker of the House, and then in the Senate you have Mitch McConnell. Before the healthcare fiasco, he was obviously seen as the as the strongest person in the Senate. He's the one that's able to corral the most votes. He's the one that's able to convince people to work for him and against their own needs. So the leadership didn't change, which I found to be surprising.
In the Senate, the Democrats ended up gaining New Hampshire and Illinois, surprisingly. They didn't have those stronghold in those states as far as the Senate was concerned. In the House, they gained Nevada, and the Republicans secured Florida for the first time in a long time. They also gained a stronghold in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and overall the entire wall.
Did I end it?
No.
Okay, we're still going. I'm sorry. I kicked over the recorder.
No problem.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, so they ended up not getting a stronghold, but getting more of a stronghold on the entire blue wall, which includes states like Wisconsin, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, those states.
Indianapolis. Everyone loves the great state of Indianapolis.
Oh yeah.
I'm not sweet, but it's amazing to think that. First of all, I was rather surprised when you look up this data. Obviously, you don't know like off the top of your head who has what states. So to think that the Democrats didn't have New Hampshire, even though like it's plausible because, as I said, Republicans have a fairly good chances during each election to win New Hampshire, is still rather shocking. And also the fact that he was able to secure Illinois, or they were able to secure Illinois, even though Hillary Clinton's margin of victory was far lower than Barack Obama's margin of victory. It shows that the presidential election, that was the one that was very radicalized. And in Congress, people didn't want the no business Congress. They didn't want the Congress that was super partisan and didn't do any work. The one that they had endured since basically 2010 up until 2015. So that shows that they're fighting against that. And as Sean mentioned, the major House changes were that the Democrats gained in Nevada. That can be expected. Nevada has been turning reliably blue. They voted for Clinton. Then they voted for Obama, so you can expect that. And overall, the demographics are pretty will lean toward Democrats. The Republicans secure Florida. So do you think that Florida is now a lost cause for the Democrats? Do you think they need to go outside of Florida, and Florida is no longer a deciding state?
Well, I personally don't think that, and I'll explain why. Because Florida has always been a toss-up state, and it's still a toss-up state. It's going to be a toss-up state unless there are some major demographic changes, because I think it can go either way. I just don't think the Democrats put up a winning candidate. If they put up a Joe Biden, for example, then it could have been more of a toss-up than it eventually was. It could have probably gone to the Democrats as well. So I think it's a matter of who you choose to be your nominee that determines the outcome of states like Florida. And now the blue wall that we've learned is now more of a toss-up wall.
It's not a rule. It's more of a recommendation. Like, try and win these states.
Yeah.
I don't know. I always am surprised that Florida is able. When you look at like the campaigns, I'm always surprised that Democrats are able to win Florida, because Florida is like, it's in the middle of this extremely red area. Like, it's right next to Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, Georgia, like all of these states that are stereotypically like red and Republican. Florida's just kind of like smack dab in the middle, and just because of its coastal cities and its rather liberal views in those areas, it's able to secure it. But the fact that, once again, people in the House are tending to lean towards conservative views, even in Florida, just shows like, this was completely unexpected. Everything that was happening in the Senate, anything was possible in the election. So they secured Florida. Then you had gains in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. That was to be expected. That was obviously to be expected because of if you can't get the president to win those states, even though it's called the blue wall, you can't expect that they're going to have gains or at least just stay with those two states. So let me pull up the counties. Actually, do I have this map? It's not this classic library Wi-Fi. Always super bad.
I have it open, but there's not much. Really.
Is there? It gives the numbers, but it doesn't give these straight up.
Hillary got 3 million more votes, but she won a quarter of the counties. Not a quarter. Wait, let me actually see this exact proportion. Right? So she won. Well, Trump won 5.36 times more counties than Hillary. Over 5 times more counties than Hillary, but she won the popular vote. And this is why people are talking about illegals voting. This is why people were talking about states like California and overall the coastal states, especially New England, which voted overwhelmingly for Hillary, ended up giving her a stronger popular vote lead.
So for the states, what is this? For the House of Representatives, you had Democratic gains in Nevada, as we mentioned. You had a small gain in Virginia. Then they secured New Hampshire, so that's good. And then it looks like the only Republican gains was that Nebraska and is that Florida? So it looks like those were the only gains they had. That's the only ones that pop out.
Yeah.
The only massive counties that are like easily recognizable.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you switch over to the Senate, overall the Democrats gained in both houses, like sheer number, right? Like, what was the layout in? Yeah, so they gained in the Senate, and then if you want to look at the elections, they gained in the House of Representatives. If you want to look at the Senate elections in 2016, I'm pretty sure that they gained in those too. Excuse me for just a moment as I pull this up. How do you think Chuck Schumer has been as the minority leader? Yeah, they gained 2 seats. And
for some reason, this Wikipedia's page still has Harry Reid as the leader of the minority party.
Oh, he was retired. So at least they have him as retiring. I'm pretty sure at that point, people like realize like, okay, Harry Reid, your time is done. Thank you for your time. So yeah, Republicans had no gains. Your boys in the Democrats, they gained Illinois and New Hampshire. Bang bang, dab up on them. But then, let's just mention this really quickly because I don't want to wait like 6 months. The midterms. Ooh boy, do you want to get into that just a little bit?
Yeah, for a couple minutes.
Yeah. So if you, you have, what was it? Obviously, all of the House of Representatives, everything is up to grab. If you have enough whiplash from the Trump administration, which obviously there's over a year, you still got time for him to mess up spectacularly.
Yeah.
So I'm personally hoping that either Mueller releases. I don't even want him impeached. I just want Mueller to release the report and just demolish the Republicans in the House of Representatives, because that's where budget bills originate. You need the House of Representatives if you actually want to do anything monetarily. Like obviously, with things like domestic policy or foreign policy or the military, that kind of has to be done by both committees or both chambers. But when it comes specifically to budget bills, since they must originate in the House of Representatives, that makes it so that if the Democrats are able to control the House of Representatives, they will have some major effects on things like healthcare, which Paul Ryan tried to play under as a budget rule.
Yeah.
He tried to play that through the budget committee. So I personally don't think. Actually, if you can gain 2 states, maybe you can gain 3. So if they gain 3 seats, then they'll have a majority in the Senate. The one I would really like to see, though, is a majority in the House of Representatives. Who do you think would be the Speaker of the House if the Democrats got that? I don't think it would be Pelosi.
That's actually a very good question.
I think there's some people that are emerging. Pelosi just has that name recognition because she's been here for since we landed on the moon. She's been Speaker of the House, it seems like.
Exactly.
But I think they're going to keep her there just because of the name recognition. Like, if someone sees, Pelosi in a news headline, they're going to be like, okay, I know it's the Democrats. The Senate, though, I think that's more up to grabs. Because Chuck Schumer, he's been workable. He's been doing what he needs to. I don't think he's been overly effective, though. Like, he's working... He's not working hard enough, especially when it came to those nominations. Like, he just wasn't able to whip the votes. And he wasn't able to convince people. Once again, it's unlikely that someone like Bernie Sanders is just going to finesse his way through and becomes majority leader of the Senate.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's possible at this stage. I think Bernie Sanders is focusing his efforts completely solely on passing tuition-free college.
Medicare for All Act?
Yeah, Medicare for All Act of 2017. These are the stuff that he's trying to push. He's not really trying to work up his way into the higher ranks of the House. Speaker of the House. I think he's just trying to get these bills passed at this point.
Okay. I think we've kind of said it. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you for listening. This has been the first episode of Real Talk with Bilal and Shan. We're super excited. Yeah. We hope the series kind of gets the viewership for us in order to continue.
We'd love for this to gain traction. Spread this with your friends, family, dogs, cats, everyone you can get to spread the word.
Yeah.
But once again, thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for listening. Dry mouth, obviously. We will get back to you in a week or two with our next episodes. Once again, thank you guys, and stay tuned. Thanks.
Thank you so much.